something about performing great literature, and especially with a period instrument orchestra, where you go to the extra trouble to have people have different instruments and learn, makes us want to be scholars, makes us want to do the research to find out whether Beethoven really wrote the right thing when he put a certain legato or a smooth sign in the music, whether he put enough dots here, and you really want to study it. You really want a performance like this to represent what was going on in Beethoven's time. Even in the 15 years since I performed it before, probably the greatest Beethoven scholar, editor ever, has contributed a new edition of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. His name is Jonathan Del Mar, and he has edited all of the Beethoven symphonies, which means he looks at all of the autographs, all of the sources, all of the sketches, all of the parts that we have. Again, Beethoven was a famous composer, so we have a lot of the material. And this is a typical sketch page of Beethoven, and one can barely read those words. Not to mention trying to read the notes. He even has things scribbled out here. Jonathan Del Mar looks at things like that, and he produces this critical commentary, which is 75 pages of the mistakes in the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. And by mistakes, I mean that, well, how can there be a mistake? We've been playing this piece, people sing it, it's been going for all these decades, centuries. Well, sometimes it's outright mistakes. It's a wrong note. He just wrote a wrong note, and we know it's a wrong note, so we fixed it. But other times it's more just like articulation things, dynamic things, shading things, more subtle things, where in bar 5, where he has the same music as he has in bar 10, he writes it one way, and then he writes it a little differently in bar 10, and the great question is, did he want it to be different, or was he just careless? He was so sloppy that he just dashed it off, and if you asked him, if we could ask him, we know he was an irascible person, and he would have said, "You idiot, can't you see that I meant this to be like it is in bar 5? He was always sending his materials to the publishers. Then the publishers would struggle with this and try to create something. They would send it back to Beethoven, and he wrote the nastiest letters back to the publishers saying, what am I dealing with children for? Any idiot could see that I was very clear what I wanted there. And so, he was always fighting with people about this. So believe it or not, even though it's one of the most famous pieces of music ever written, and we think all the notes are just already known to us, actually, that's not true. Every performance has the capacity for major shifts in interpretation, and even the text itself. There's a passage called a stringendo, which is an accelerando it's an accelerando from something to something. You know what the arrival tempo is, you know the tempo you're at, so you incrementally increase, like a train, right? Dum, bum, 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 until you arrive at the new tempo. The movement yum-pa-dum, bum-pa-dum, 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 bum, has the metronome mark that it's supposed to be 116 beats per minute. That means that yum-pa-dum, bum-pa-dum, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. That's the tempo that Beethoven indicated. Dotted half, 3 notes to a bar, equals 116. And he calls that molto vivace, very fast. Bum-pa-dum, 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 yum-pa-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Very clear, it's a good tempo, it works. Orchestras have always played it that way. But then he has an accelerando, get faster into the middle section. And the accelerando has a typo. There's a problem. Because once he arrives at the new tempo, he has half note equals 116, and he writes the same number, 116. And that's not possible. It needs to be faster. If you really translate this literally, it will end up slower, not faster. And so that can't be possible. What is the mistake? Well, the mistake, I think, is actually more like we know from Renaissance music. Beethoven, of course, had a giant mind, had a terrific mathematical capacity. In the Renaissance, sometimes the time of 2 fits into the time of 3, but you keep the beat the same. So you have you have yet, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So I'm keeping the beat the same, but the number of notes inside the bar are changing. This was a very well-known Renaissance thing. That was before they had metronomes, but we see this in choral scores where it goes into 2 when it was in 3. And I could play you examples of that, but suffice it to say, I believe that's what was going on in this place in the Beethoven Symphony. That he made this reference to how to transform the 3 into a 2. And after I had this idea, I realized that that's where the accelerando comes in. He accelerates to the point, it should accelerate to exactly the point of compensation of where you've arrived at the time where it will fit, let's say. So if you subdivide and make, what does that mean that each of the 3 notes is? It's 348, which isn't on any metronome. That'd be, it'd be so fast you couldn't play it or even measure it, really. But for the point of analysis, if the quarter equals 348, then that means that the half becomes 174. And believe me, that relationship of keeping the quarter note the same, once you get to the arrival point, never mind the accelerando, you will equalize the relationship of 2 over 3, or 3 over 2. And once this came to me, which was literally in the middle of the night one night, I've been living it ever since for 15 years, it just popped. It makes complete sense. And now I feel like I know the answer to what was happening there. And now when players play it, it really truly seems to fit. And I know that many of the recordings people have, sometimes conductors decide to do it a little slower, the second part. Sometimes they do it a little faster. Sometimes they even compensate the first part. Yum-ba-dum, bum-ba-dum, yum-ba-da, bup-ba-da, bup-bup-bup-bup, which makes it boring. It doesn't work. So listen for that.